Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming, and this is episode 6 on our Wasteland Warfare series. Today we're going to talk about blast, auras, and scatter, and by blast we just mean area of effect. Before we dig in, as always, there's going to be some Amazon affiliate links for various Fallout Wasteland Warfare products in the description. If you are looking to get some more models or some dice, click those links, get them on Amazon. It won't cost you anything extra, and it'll give me a little kickback. It's a great way to support the channel and still play the games that you love. I don't normally do this, but I wanted to give a shout out because we're getting really close. We're at about 722 last time I checked. So make sure you're liking and subscribing. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and subscribe. Let's hit 1,000. That's really my goal. Once we hit 1,000, I'm going to go back to not really having these little intros where I tell you to like and subscribe. And a lot of it is because I dug into the analytics, and about 90% of my viewers are not subscribers. So I really only need like a 20 to 30% turnover rate or conversion rate in order to hit that goal. So if you could do me a favor, hit that subscribe, help me hit 1,000. What that does is that unlocks the ability for me to get paid for making these videos. And really, that just means I'll have more time for making videos because I won't be working my other jobs as much. And I'll be able to cut back on those and devote more time into making videos and content. So, my little blurb is over. Thanks for listening. First, we're going to talk about blast or area of effect. And for those that don't know, I come from a big 40K Warhammer Fantasy background. So some of the words I use are really just the vernacular for those games. And so if you're confused, I apologize. It's not meant to confuse you. It's just because the way I understand these mechanics already has a term, and sometimes I just find myself using that term. We're going to talk about it. What does it look like? How does it work? And then we're also going to do a little bit of a discussion on some of the rules interactions that seem kind of weird. And then we're going to talk about scatter. And again, what does it look like on the cards? How does it work? And what my group uses or does instead. It'll get the same effect across. It's just a little bit easier in terms of implementing it. And then we're going to talk about auras and presence skill, but only as it pertains to auras. And so let's dig in. Blast radius, or area effect weapon damage, as it is called in the rule book, is annotated on the weapon with a colored circle. The color indicates the range, and then you'll notice there are notches on the corners, and that's just for the colorblind key. Oh, yellow has these notches so that people who are colorblind can see which ruler they're supposed to use. It can have a symbol inside of the circle, and if it does, that just lets you know if there's an additional effect. For example, if you see a yellow circle with a fire or flame token or icon, that means everything within the area gets a burn token. If you see a number, if it's just a yellow circle and it has a number 3 in it, that means everything within the circle takes 3 damage, for example. Now we're going to talk about a little bit more stuff in there. Any model, friend, and foe caught beneath it, even if it's just partially, is hit by the blast effect. And then each model gets damage and armor rolls resolved individually. So you're going to just resolve all of your armor. You're going to resolve all of your damage and your armor into models one at a time, having them roll their armor rolls one at a time. Pretty straightforward. When targeting a model in close combat, as in you're shooting into a close combat, not you're engaged and shooting. When targeting a close combat, randomize targets as normal. If the attack hits, then blast from the randomly selected target. So again, if you're shooting into a melee and there's 3 people in that melee, you'll still assign your random numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll still roll, and then the target that you roll becomes the target. And then if it misses, you'll scatter from the target. But if it hits, you'll area effect or blast from the target. So there's a good chance if you shoot into a melee that you're going to hit the intended target, whether you hit the intended target or not. When using a shoot action in place of a close combat action, and this is when you'd be engaged and you'd be shooting, if you use a blast weapon, your normal penalties apply. You'll scatter on miss as normal. If the weapon has a minimum range, it can't be used. That being said, we're going to talk about some of the weird stuff we've come across, and one of those that I want to talk about first is in action shoot, the line of sight rules allude to being able to target an object or point on the battlefield. And what I mean by this is it doesn't explicitly say that you have to target a enemy model or unit, and because line of sight says, hey, you got to be able to see the point on the battlefield, the terrain feature, or the model that you're shooting. That tells me as a player that I don't have to target enemy models. I can target the battlefield. I can target basically whatever I want to. And for those of you that are watching and not just listening, there's a screenshot of that on the screen. You can see in bold where it says any part of the model's base, any part of the model's base or object or point on the battlefield. Uh, this create some gamey, and I use that term kind of loosely because it is a game, but I understand what the intent is behind that term. Interactions, and I don't think it was intentional, but it does allow for circumvention of specific rules. It can bypass the random roll for shooting into combat. For example, you could shoot the ground next to your intended target and still avoid hitting everybody else in the combat as long as you hit and don't scatter. And then you can bypass the stealth boy perception roll or the coursers, right? Because they just have a stealth boy ability. You can bypass those interactions by simply not shooting at the models and shooting at the table. And again, I don't think this was intentional. And I've been told by various people, a couple of whom actually work for the company, that have been like, well, like you're kind of an asshole if you're doing that, and that's fair. And again, not that they're actually saying people are assholes, but I understand the intent again behind that sentence. What they're saying is, hey, this was clearly not supposed to interact this way, and we put the onus on the players to understand that. Again, just referencing my background as a tournament organizer and a judge for Games Workshop Actual. Like, I'm not just some dude who runs tournaments in his basement for his friends. Like, I travel with the company and I help them organize and run tournaments. There's a lot of emphasis placed on things being rules as written, rules as written. Now, obviously, you can't always do rules as written. Sometimes you have to understand that there's a rules as intended side as well. And the rules as intended side, to me, says, hey, you're probably not supposed to actually be able to shoot at the battlefield. It's probably there for those rare situations where you need to, like shooting a landmine, because you're not actually shooting a enemy. Then you're just shooting effectively a spot on the battlefield. So to me, that's the intent behind being able to shoot the targets. Please, please, please don't shoot stealth boy. Like, don't try to circumvent stealth boys just because it's in their rules as written. Understand that that wasn't the intent. I don't know that that will ever get an errata or an FAQ, but I've been compiling all of the rules, all of the free rules into a website. There's going to be a link in the description. And as I compile it, I will make a note in that section specifically about, hey, look, I understand, but this is not the intent. And again, I have no authority. Don't think I do. I'm not sitting here saying like I'm an official Modifius representative. In no way am I. But it's one of those where I have been talking with some of the people who have been play testers and stuff like that. And I have been talking a lot with the community in general and just trying to get a feel for what the intent is behind some of these rules. So when I speak, I'm not speaking with any kind of authority, but I am speaking with some common sense knowledge of, hey, look, like this rule was designed to protect these models. You should not be able to circumvent this rule, etc. So I'm done rambling on that. The other thing that I've noticed is, and I don't think I have it on the slide there, but the other thing I've noticed is when you're engaged, and I may have this in a later slide, we'll find out in a couple minutes, and you shoot a blast weapon, it creates some weird. Actually, I'm pretty sure I do have this now that I'm saying it, but we'll talk about it now and we'll touch on it again later. It can create some weird scenarios in which, things like sentry bots have really big bases. So if I hit the sentry bot because the blast token is centered on the model because you're targeting the model because it's still a attack made in close combat, the blast itself, if it's small enough, won't extend beyond the base of the model. And that means that if you have a small blast and you're shooting like an orange area effect and you're shooting a sentry bot while you're engaged, like you just drop a grenade on it, that means the only risk you have is if you miss. And that seemed kind of weird. And again, I don't know that that was necessarily the intent. I understand that the Sentry bot has a big base, and maybe it is the intent. But what we've done as a local community is if you hit, you place that blast template where the bases touch because you're not hiding from a grenade. As a person who has thrown grenades, as a person who's been like shot at with rocket propelled grenades, as a person who's been through IEDs because of my time in Iraq, like you're not hiding from grenades. So it just made sense for us to go, you know what, this isn't super clear. So we're going to just base that off of where the bases touch, and then everything's going to get hit that it falls under. So scatter. Some weapons have scatter, and this is represented by colored rectangles at the bottom of the weapon card. You'll see them. It's usually like orange, yellow, red, or whatever. And then they'll have a number range inside of them. So, for example, you might see an orange square and it has a 1-2, or you might see a yellow square with a 3-4, and so on. Those ranges are the numbers are a measure of your margin of error. How badly did you fail the skill check to hit the target? And then the colors are the range distance. So if you need a 4 to hit your target, but you rolled a 5, your margin for error is 1 because it's what you rolled on the die minus your target number. So again, using that logic, if we had an orange square with a 1 or 2, your margin of error was 1 or 2. So you'll scatter orange. And then if you roll an X, it's always whatever the largest scatter is. It just counts as whatever the biggest scatter color you have is. So when your attack misses after you determine the scatter range, right? So you roll your skill check, you compare it to your target number, you find your margin for error. Now you find your scatter range. After that, you determine the scatter direction. The rules recommend using a scatter token, and that's just an arrow token, and you flip it. I'm going to tell you right now, don't do that. You can if you want to. It's a nightmare. It's things flying across the table. It's things flipping in the air. It's just a hot mess. And again, I understand why the game's very reliant on tokens, and you're going to have a lot of tokens. And it was just easier as a company to go, hey, here's a token. Use this for scatter. That way, you don't need another specialized thing for the game. But because I've played Necromunda and because I play Old World or Warhammer Fantasy, things like that, I have scatter dice. So we just roll scatter dice. Like I just roll up with scatter dice to every game I play, and we just roll scatter dice. And if you don't know what a scatter die is, it's just a d6. Each side has an arrow on it. One side has like a little target on it, but the target itself has a little arrow as well, so that if you roll the target and you still need to scatter, the arrow points to the direction, and then you just scatter in whatever direction the arrow is pointing. If you don't have a scatter die, but you do have a 10-sided die, you can also just roll a 10-sided die. Because when you look at them from above, they make an arrow, and you can just scatter in the direction that the 10-sided die is facing. And that is just so much easier than trying to flip a token. And again, I'm not putting anybody down. I understand the logic. I just wanted to say, hey, look, if you haven't considered this as an alternative, I would do one of these other two things. It's going to give you more variance in your scatter as opposed to, flipping a token that could float and sail and may not necessarily rotate or move right. Let's talk about auras now. This isn't going to be a super long one, actually, which is good. I've had some 20 to 30-minute videos coming out, and keeping this one in that 10 to 15 is going to feel nice. Certain abilities have the aura icon. You'll see it on the right-hand side of the screen, but if you're just listening, it's a little circle with like a sunburst around it. And that's really what it looks like, is like a supernova or a star, but you only get the top half of it. Aura abilities do affect all eligible models in the aura giver's presence range. And what I mean by eligible is if it says all friendly, then it affects all friendly. The Within this model's, the aura giver's presence range. And if you don't know what presence skill is, it looks like an antenna with waves coming out of it. It almost kind of looks like two Wi-Fi symbols, right? Like it's just an antenna with a Wi-Fi symbol around it. And then to measure an aura, you just put the edge of the proper color ruler against the model's base and see what is within range. And remember that the aura is 360 degrees. So if you have a blue ranged aura, you just take that blue ruler and you go all the way around your base, and all of the friendly models within it are able to be affected by the aura. The one thing to keep in mind is that as per the errata, auras do need line of sight. So if you haven't, or if you didn't know that, make sure you're checking the errata. Again, I am slowly getting the errata and the rulebook compiled into a website so people can find things easier without having to dig through multiple PDFs. But yeah, it is required as per the errata. So yes, you could affect all visible eligible, and that still falls into eligibility, but it's one of those where it's important to note like all visible eligible models. So if you have an aura that affects enemy models, it'll only affect visible enemy models that are within range, etc. So auras were pretty straightforward. That's one we actually messed up a little bit when we first started. There was an assumption that it would work like area effect or blast, because that makes sense, right? Like they're both similar interactions because they're both an area of effect. So it made sense to us that they would be centered regardless. But, that's one we got wrong digging into the rules, and that's the neat thing about this game is that just when I think I've got everything figured out, I find something else and I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. This is how this works. Oh, that's neat. This is how this works." So, and again, if you're just listening, a quick reminder: the aura ability looks like I said, like a star or a supernova, but you're only getting the top half. And when I say supernova, I just think like that explosion kind of bursty visual. And then the present skill is just a antenna with some Wi-Fi symbols. That's it. And then remember that the presence skill will have a color corresponding to it. So if you have a red presence, etc. The next episode, we're going to take a look at power armor, and then pretty soon we're going to start working on the settlement supplement overview. I did pick up the Nuka World PDF, so we're going to dig into some of that as well. I again really appreciate everybody who's been watching. Hope these videos are helping. Have a good one.